everybody, it's February, and that means two things. One, new games are coming out, and two, I made a video to tell you all about them. Presumably, it being February probably means other things besides those two things, like your rent's due and it's time to stock up on candy conversation hearts, but really, the important thing is the video games, and this video that I made all about them. Here are February's biggest game releases. Before we get into it, a friendly reminder that we do our very best to make these videos comprehensive and accurate, but you know what? Sometimes it happens, whether that's getting delayed last minute or us not getting our right in the first place, so pardon any we get wrong, and also pardon my French. Last month, a few comments scolded us for not mentioning that Granblue Fantasy Relink is out, and there's a very good but also very stupid reason for that. Some places say that it's out January 31st, and some places say it's out February 1st, so depending where you live, it might be out last month, and it might be out this month for PS4, PS5, and PC. And if you're impatient, you could probably use some kind of workaround with VPNs and region settings and burner accounts, but chances are, by the time you're watching this video, it's probably already out. On February 2nd, Rocksteady's long-delayed Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League finally hits new-gen and PC, and I know the buzz around this one hasn't been great, but maybe it'll be a pleasant surprise thanks to lowered expectations. And hey, maybe once it's out, Rocksteady can shift gears from a game where you murder Batman and Superman and all their friends to a game where, I don't know, maybe you get to play as them. I'm just throwing that one out there. That same day, you can load up Persona 3 Reload, which is a full do-over of the 2006 PS2 installment that made its way to PSP in 2009. If you played the original version when it was ported to a laundry list of platforms last year, it should be readily apparent just how much of an overhaul this game has gotten, and depending how you played the previous version, you may notice some major differences story-wise. That's on everything but Switch, but according to the devs, that may change in the future. Another game involving Japanese high schoolers doing extracurricular sorcery and whatnot is Jujutsu Kaisen Cursed Clash, which is also out that day on everything, including Switch. Still that day is Project Downfall, which is like a quasi-retro-styled FPS that's basically John Wick with a cyberpunk twist and lots of magenta and turquoise, which looks pretty cool. That's already out on PC, and now it'll be on the Xboxes and Switch. On the 6th, Foamstars is launching exclusively on PlayStation Plus for PS4 and 5. It'll be sold the old-fashioned way on March 5th, and if you haven't been keeping track, this is a multiplayer shooter that looks somewhere between Persona, a K-pop video, and Splatoon. The creators are apparently tired of people saying it looks like Splatoon, which is understandable, but also, it looks a lot like Splatoon. It's obviously a totally new game running on a different system with a slew of different mechanics for the most part, but there's also no way in hell that Splatoon wasn't a major source of inspiration for this game. Last month, a bunch of you in the comments said that I look like Ace Ventura on account of my slick back hair and exciting party shirt, and probably the manic delivery in these videos, and I don't mind. If I did mind, I would probably style my hair differently and maybe wear different shirts. Just putting that out there. My point is, if you don't want people to say your game looks like Splatoon, don't make a game that looks and plays so much like Splatoon. Anyway, some people are foaming at the mouth for this one, so let's hope it lives up to their frothing anticipation instead of bursting their bubble. A game that sounds like it might also be about blending colorful liquids of varying viscosities together, but actually isn't, is Mixture, which hits PSVR 2 on the 6th. That's a third-person hack-and-slash platformer that makes use of the VR space to make the player feel like they are a giant bystander, overlook what's happening in the game. It's already on MetaQuest 2, and people seem to like it well enough, and also it's about a Mothman with a giant scythe, which is two things I didn't think I've combined in my head before, but now that I have, I kind of want a tattoo of it, because that's sick. Still on the 6th is Alisa Developer's Cut. That's a low-poly action-adventure that clearly takes some inspiration from PS1-era survival horror and also American McGee's Alice, that already came out for PC in 2021, but now it's hitting the PlayStations, Xboxes, and Switch with a bunch of improvements and additional content. Helldivers 2 hits PS5 and PC on February 8th, loading you and some pals up with spaceman armor and heavy weaponry to go starship trooping around on alien planets, probably getting an ass-kicking in the process. The sequel is a pretty substantial leap forward from its predecessor in basically every way, and hopefully it manages to retain what made that first game so much fun when it came out 9 years ago. Good lord, I feel old. Speaking of getting old, on the 13th, Tomb Raider 1 through 3 Remastered drops, and as the clunky title suggests, this gives Lara Croft's first 3 adventures from the PS1 era a nice modern makeover, not a full overhaul, but a noticeable bump visually and some quality of life improvements as well. I was gonna say they should have just called it the Tomb Raider Trilogy, but then I remembered that there have been like 2.5 of those, and probably some other sprinklings of games in there. There've been a lot of Tomb Raider games, but if you want to play the first 3, now you can, and you can lock the butler in the walk-in freezer on basically every platform. That same day, Fight Crab 2 comes to PC so you can crush crustaceans to your heart's content. Watch out, that's a Kenyan mangrove crab. Brrr, crab battle.
Okay. Let's do this, motherfucker.
Still on the 13th, all the platforms that start with a P get Ultros, which is a psychedelic-looking Metroidvania, giving its distinctive look from artist El Huervo, who you probably know best for doing the Hotline Miami box art. In terms of subject matter, this looks a little less Michael Mann and a lot more Mobius, but you can definitely see the resemblance. On Valentine's Day, you can tell your significant other, "Well, excuse me, princess, I cannot eat a romantic candle at dinner, I have to play Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore," which I cannot believe I'm saying this, is a semi-spiritual successor to the two red-headed stepchildren of the Zelda franchise, the Wand of Gamelon and Faces of Evil. Arzette's gameplay looks like some decent 16-bit platforming, but the animated cutscenes reunite some of the talent behind those bizarre Philips CDI versions of Link and Zelda. Sure, why not? That's on basically everything. On the 15th, Undercover VR comes to the newer Quest models, and it's a first-person cover-based shooter that pays homage to classic arcade light gun games, but also seems to have plenty of modern sensibilities. Repeatedly popping in and out of cover in VR is probably a great workout, so maybe give that a shot if you're bored of just doing regular old squats and lunges. That same day, PlateUp comes to all the consoles. This is the Overcooked-like with an added layer of restaurant design and management that was made by the Yogscast publishing arm. It hit PC last August, but the console versions are finally out. But hey, delays happen, just ask Skull and Bones, Ubisoft's long-awaited pirate game that is supposedly actually coming out on February 16th. It's been pushed back something like 7 times, I've actually lost count, so excuse me if I sound skeptical, but hey, if you like pirates, that's on new gen and PC, assuming it actually comes out. Switch players, meanwhile, can revisit one of, if not the oldest rivalry in video games, which is Mario vs. Donkey Kong, a remake of the Game Boy Advance original that pairs Mario's platforming with plenty of puzzling, and also for all you fans of Mario's first love, Jump Up Superstars, because Pauline will be back as well. On the 20th, the psychological horror game MADiSON VR comes to PSVR 2 and Steam VR, so you can be even more frightened and nauseated than you are under normal circumstances. Also on the 20th, a game that I've had my eye on since I saw it at Gamescom last year is the Thaumaturge, which is a story-rich RPG set in 1905 Warsaw. It's an awesome mix of heavily researched historical fiction, complicated, morally ambiguous decision-making, but also summoning demons to battle, so sort of like Pokemon and Persona a little bit. That's on PC, coming to new-gen consoles sometime later on. Slave Zero X is a sick-looking throwback 2.5D biopunk hack and slash that's a prequel to the 1999 cult classic. I never messed with the original, but the new one kind of reminds me of old anime trailers back when it was called Japanimation and was released by Manga Video with horrible dubs and even worse nu metal soundtracks, which is my brain damaged way of saying that it makes me want to crank up some KMFDM and shotgun a can of Surge. And also, they released a free Quake mod to promote this, which is one of the most Y2K nu metal things you can do. That's on everything except for Dreamcast on the 21st. On the 22nd, there's Promenade, or Promenade, I'm not sure which. That's a whimsical, colorful indie game that looks charming and adorable, but in the official description it says it was inspired by the best 3D platformers, which is really bizarre because as you can see, it's an extremely 2D platformer, unless I'm missing something. Either way, it is coming to all platforms in this dimension. Still on the 22nd, Nightingale hits Steam Early Access, which is a shared world survival crafting RPG that involves popping between dimensions and dealing with all sorts of unsightly beasts and creatures, and I was about to call this steampunk, but apparently it's gas lamp fantasy, the main difference being that steampunk is about the olden days but with technology that didn't exist back then, while gas lamp fantasy is about the olden days but there's magic. Either way, you got a bunch of people wearing top hats and waistcoats and cravats and petticoats and all that nonsense. Also hitting Steam Early Access that day, exclusively in VR, is Bootstrap Island. When people talk about desert island games, they usually mean games that they would want with them if they were marooned somewhere, and I'm guessing this is one of the less desirable ones you could have in that situation, since it's a VR survival game that simulates exactly the experience of being on a desert island in ye olde Robinson Crusoe times. That's also hitting PSVR 2 sometime later on. If you have a PS5 or a PC and would prefer to survive a surreal, procedurally generated post-apocalyptic road trip, that's what Pacific Drive is. The name might make you think of cruising through Malibu in a convertible with a top down, but you'll in fact be hunkered down in a highly customizable station wagon that looks like the paranoid doomsday prepper uncle of the Ecto-1, and oh yeah, this game's a roguelike. In case that wasn't enough survival games dropping on one day, Sons of the Forest will have its official 1.0 release, one day shy of exactly a year since it started early access in the first place. If all that survival stuff sounds miserable and you'd rather just dig holes and grow crops for the heck of it, there's also Garden Life, a cozy simulator which is exactly what it sounds like on everything but Switch. Meanwhile, if you think King Arthur: A Knight's Tale sounds like a single-player RPG with turn-based tactical combat rooted in Arthurian lore, well, that's also exactly what it sounds like, and it's on new gen and PC. Finally, on the 22nd, there's Open Roads, a single-player narrative adventure about a mother and daughter embarking on a road trip which may or may not involve buried treasure, but also possibly generational trauma and complicated feelings. That's an Annapurna game, which tends to be a mark of quality when it comes to indies. That's on everything. If you'd prefer a masculine fraternal road trip, well, good news, brother, because on the 28th, Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons gets a nice shiny remake. This was the first co-op adventure from Josef Fares, the guy who also brought us A Way Out and It Takes Two, and who sometimes gets on stage at the Game Awards to say swear words. Meanwhile, one of my favorite games of all time is getting a remaster, Star Wars Dark Forces. This game laid the groundwork for the Jedi Knight franchise, but the first entry is all blasters, no masters. As for the remaster, even with the polish, it is going to seem a little bit dated, but keep in mind that this game was released less than 18 months after Doom came out, the first one. How well Dark Forces holds its own as a first-person shooter is a testament to how much of a powerhouse LucasArts was back in its glory days. Fun fact you probably don't actually care about, but Dark Forces is what got me into Star Wars in the first place. I played this game at a babysitter's house before I'd seen any of the movies all the way through, and I think getting to walk around in that galaxy is what made me give the movies my attention. Anyway, the game isn't canon, but parts of it have popped up elsewhere recently. Those Dark Troopers that showed up on The Mandalorian were created for Dark Forces, and the same goes for the blaster pistol that Cassian carries on parts of Andor, which is a nice nod because the first level of Dark Forces is stealing the Death Star plans. You know, before Rogue One did it. Anyway, Dark Forces is coming out to everything. Thanks for bearing with me. Speaking of bearing with me, you can do your best to avoid having bears with you in Winter Survival, hitting early access that same day, but sadly, a week late to early access Survival Game Thursday. And a day later, I you not, there is another survival game coming out. Welcome to ParadiZE, which they spelled Paradise with a Z because it's got zombies in it. That's on new gen and PC. Even though I just told you about so many games, I probably pissed off my producer and editor who requested I keep this video nice and short. I reckon some of you have already gone in the comments to say the only worthwhile game coming out in February is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which hits PS5 on the 29th, coming to PC later on. And fair enough, the hype for that game is well earned. It is the long-awaited second installment in the even longer-awaited remake trilogy of one of the most beloved RPGs of all time, and this time around, it looks to be a gorgeous, sprawling, properly next-gen open world that you can explore on, among other things, a Segway. In case you didn't get enough JRPG Segway riding action in Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth last month. Hey, while we're talking about Segways, what better time to change the subject to a different topic, the end of this video. Those are February 2024's biggest game releases. We might have missed a couple, but if we did, sound off in the comments and let us know. Unless you're gonna be a mean about it, in which case, whisper into a seashell and go bury it in the garden. Grow yourself a complaint tree. I love you, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day. I'll see you next month.